The Prime Minister is accused of corruption and trashing democracy as MPs debate parliamentary standards. It follows the row about the former Tory MP Owen Paterson after the government tried to block his suspension and overturn the rules last week. Boris Johnson is attacked by the Labour leader for not turning up to take part in the debate.
He does not even have the decency to come here either to defend what he did or to apologise for his action.
I would like first and foremost to express my regret and that of my ministerial colleagues over the mistake made last week.
The Prime Minister says he is unavailable to attend the debate, which is still going on. We'll bring you the latest. Also tonight, the new head of Yorkshire County Cricket says the investigation into racism at the club was badly handled and seismic change is needed. Cleared for joint takeoff as the US opens its border to the UK after a travel ban lasting 600 days. Jailed for murder, the boy who was 14 when he stabbed his 12-year-old friend over 70 times. And hundreds of rescuers work on into a third night to save an injured man trapped deep in a cave on the Brecon Beacons.
Coming up in Sports Day later in the hour on the BBC News channel, how's Eddie Howe been received at Newcastle? The new head coach has walked into a relegation battle.
Good evening and welcome to the BBC News at 6. The Prime Minister has been accused of running scared from a debate taking place in the House of Commons now about the rules that govern MPs. It follows a row about the government's efforts to change those rules last week, prompted by an investigation into lobbying by the former Conservative MP Owen Paterson. That and the government U-turn the following day caused outrage among opposition parties and many Tory MPs. The Labour leader Keir Starmer has attacked the Prime Minister for not having the decency to come to the House to apologise or to defend his actions. Boris Johnson says he's unavailable to attend. The Cabinet Office Minister Stephen Barclay has expressed his regret for the mistake made by the government last week. Our political editor Laura Koonsberg has been watching the debate.
What really lurks underneath? Is it always clear to see? For politicians, for Parliament, what's right and wrong? A senior Tory quit last week after breaking the rules. His party caused outrage when it tried to save him. But is the Prime Minister ready to reflect or to show regret?
To be clear, Prime Minister, you're not going to apologise for the way you acted last week?
Look, I think it's very important that we get this right, and we are going to make every effort to get it right, and we are going to hold MPs to account. What I think is also, and MPs, as I said last week, should not break the rules.
It's been a sombre moment. The Tories were accused of trying to rig the rules for one of their own. And the Speaker used today to warn it must never happen again.
What I don't want is another dark week like last week. I want to make sure the public have faith in parliamentarians and faith in the House of Commons. And today's debate will be painful. But the one thing is, it's got to cleanse the House to move forward.
MPs are not allowed to talk directly to the government for firms that are paying them wages. Owen Paterson was found to have broken that rule, and that's why this is all blown up. But they are allowed to do work on top of the day job of being a constituency MP. Even being a government minister is technically a second job. But they must publish anything extra that they earn over £100 in a register. And there's huge variation in the things they do. From shifts in A&E to offering legal advice
In the
commonly writing articles for
Southeast.
the papers. But only a few dozen out of more than 600 MPs are earning extra enormous amounts in the tens of thousands of pounds.
But many Tories are worried about the perception. The Prime Minister may not have made time to turn up or wanted to say sorry, but
I would like first and foremost to express my regret and that of my ministerial colleagues over the mistake made last week.
Leader of the Opposition.
yet Boris Johnson's no-show give the opposition another reason to keep on pushing.
Instead of clearing up his mess, he's left his side knee-deep in it. Instead of leading from the front, he's cowered away. He is not a serious leader, and the joke isn't funny anymore.
The SNPs even complained to the police about claims of cash for honours.
I have now asked the Metropolitan Police to investigate the activities of the Conservative Party and the awarding of places in the House of Lords.
Boris Johnson might have got back to London too late for the start of the debate, but he can't pretend the conversation about money and politics isn't taking place.
Fiona, MPs have been talking about this with passion and vigour for the last couple of hours here in Westminster after what has felt at times a bit of a frenzy in the last few days. But we are really none the wiser at this stage if the rules that police MPs' behaviour are going to be tightened up. And if they are tightened up, what kind of changes actually might there be? One senior Conservative has suggested today even bringing in outside former judges as and when things go wrong. But what we can be sure of is that this is a conversation that Number 10 would rather not be having.
Laura at Westminster, thank you. The new head of Yorkshire County Cricket Club has apologised to former captain Azim Rafiq after his experiences of racism at the club. Lord Kamlesh Patel said the club's investigation into Mr Rafiq's allegations had been badly handled and that seismic change is needed. It found there had been racial harassment and bullying at Yorkshire, but no one was disciplined. There have been several high-profile resignations at the club. Azim Rafiq welcomed Lord Patel's comments but called for more people at the top of the club to quit. Our sports editor Dan Rowan reports.
Headingley has witnessed some of the greatest revivals in English cricket history, but leading Yorkshire out of an unprecedented racism crisis could surpass them all. And having been installed as the club's new chairman, Lord Kamlesh Patel today told a press conference here that the county must learn lessons.
I'm determined to make this club the beating heart of English cricket again. After 158 years, we're ready to change. We're ready to accept the past. And we're ready to become a club which people can trust to do the right thing.
A report found former player Azim Rafiq was a victim of racial harassment and bullying at Yorkshire, but the club took no action against anyone, sparking outrage. Today it settled a separate employment tribunal with the spinner, with no gagging order imposed.
I thank Azim Rafiq for his bravery in speaking out. Azim is a whistleblower and should be praised as such. And he should never have been put through this. And I'd like to apologise to him. What happened to you must never happen again.
Yorkshire are setting up an independent whistleblowing hotline for other victims of discrimination to come forward, and after criticism over a lack of transparency have also released the report to those with a legal interest in it.
Have you had a chance to look through the full report, and if so, what did you think of what you found in it?
What I've seen so far does make me feel uncomfortable, that the process wasn't as well complete as it should have been. That's why it needs seismic change.
Today in a statement, Rafiq said, "I spoke out because I wanted to create change at the club. I brought a legal claim because the club refused to acknowledge the problem and create change. This is a good start, but I want to reiterate my call for the change that must come next and one that must happen quickly." Today in Dubai, ahead of the semi-finals of the T20 World Cup, one of England's senior players and a proud Muslim gave this response to the crisis.
I wouldn't say I'm surprised, but I would say there's probably more stories out there that people haven't heard of, and I won't be surprised if more do come out, but I think the fact that it's come out, it's great.
Having become engulfed by a crisis that has rocked the cricketing world, Yorkshire will be desperately hoping that this marks the first day in the road to recovery. But with more damaging revelations set to come, regaining trust along with sponsors and the right to host international matches here will be no easy task. Dan Rowan, BBC News, Headingley.
The former US President Barack Obama has been addressing the COP26 summit in Glasgow as discussions focus on how to mitigate the climate change that is already affecting the world. The UK has pledged an additional £290 million to help poorer nations, part of a $100 billion package it's seeking from richer countries. Mr. Obama, who grew up on the Hawaiian Islands in the Pacific, said action can't be delayed, as our science editor David Shukman reports.
Deeper floods, bigger fires, higher temperatures. Climate change is being felt around the world. So the talks in Glasgow are not just about the future, they're about coping with a hotter and more hostile planet right now. Pushing for an urgent response is the former US President Barack Obama. Getting a rock star reception here and saying it's not too late.
Our planet has been wounded by our actions. Those wounds won't be healed today or tomorrow or the next, but they can be healed.
And addressing young activists, he appealed to them to keep up the pressure for change.
The most important energy in this movement is coming from young people. They have more stake in this fight than anybody else. You are right to be frustrated. Folks in my generation have not done enough to deal with a potentially cataclysmic problem that you now stand to inherit.
Many young people have suffered cataclysm already. A typhoon in the Philippines 8 years ago claimed 6,000 lives, and one survivor, the daughter of a fisherman, fears more violent weather to come.
I have seen death myself. I have seen my family struggle. I still have so many dreams in this lifetime. I'm just 24 years old. I still want to have my family. I still want to have children, but I don't even know if they will have the good future ahead of them.
And with emotions running so high, activists here say even Mr. Obama has broken a promise to get climate aid to the poorest countries.
But we don't want to talk to him. What we need is action. He already knows what we want. He already knows what the people want, and that is the $100 billion pledge that he pledged in 2009 in Copenhagen.
So the challenge for the talks here is to try to turn a lot of warm words about future generations into real action, to help with existing dangers right now, and to try to avoid temperatures heading even higher. But none of this is proving easy. More and more people are enduring the kind of extremes that scientists have long warned about as the planet heats up. So this is a chance to prevent a bad situation from getting worse. David Shukman, BBC News in Glasgow.
The Health Secretary has announced an independent inquiry into mortuary security following the shocking details revealed in the trial of David Fuller last week. Fuller was convicted for sexually abusing up to 100 bodies that were stored in a hospital morgue, as well as murdering Wendy Nell and Caroline Pierce in 1987. Our health correspondent Catherine Burns is here. Catherine, the details of this case are just unbearable. What does this inquiry hope to achieve?
Well, for a start, it wants to answer the question, how did David Fuller get away with this for so long without getting caught? Because if you remember, the evidence against him only came out when police searched his house during the murder investigation. They found a huge stash then of photos and videos of him abusing the bodies of dead women and girls. If they hadn't have done this, this may never have come out. So the inquiry is going to have two stages. The first will focus largely on the local NHS trust to ask what kind of actions it can take, and that will report back early in the new year. The second stage will take longer because it's got a wider focus. It will ask what lessons the NHS needs to learn, but also local authority mortuaries and even privately run funeral directors. Now, in Parliament, Sajid Javid made a point about talking about the families of the victims. As he's put it, these are people who've already experienced such loss and now are experiencing unimaginable pain and anger. Well, some of those families have already hired lawyers and are considering legal action against the local trust. A final thought on this. David Fuller may have been convicted. The police investigation is not over. Officers are still combing through his material and expect that to take maybe another couple of months. And they point out it may not be possible to ever identify all of his victims.
Catherine, thank you. The United States has reopened its borders to fully vaccinated tourists from the UK and the EU. The border had been shut for 600 days, but this morning's flights leaving for the US were full as people set off at last to be reunited with friends and family. Our transport correspondent Caroline Davis reports.
Preparing for the big send-off, bunting and flag waving to celebrate the US reopening.
This is an essential last piece of the puzzle for international travel. America has been out of bounds for the vast majority of UK travellers for many, many months.
While fully jabbed US travellers have been able to come to the UK without quarantining since August, the majority of British passengers travelling to the US were banned in March 2020, bar a few exceptions. That's changed if you're double jabbed and have a negative COVID test. It's meant families separated by the Atlantic and restrictions can reunite, including Sarah, who was travelling to see her daughter Chloe for the first time in 2 years.
And not to be able to, console each other or keep each other company or whatever, or hug each other when we want a good cry, But we'll do it today, so I can't wait to walk through that door and see her there.
Before the pandemic, the US was the fourth most popular destination for UK travellers. Among the crowds were those taking work trips and holidaymakers who'd held out hope for months.
We had this booked and we've had to move it a couple of times, so it was
not ideal timing to be celebrating the return of a major long-haul flight route. But British Airways and Virgin Atlantic say they're pushing to be more sustainable.
We've both set targets for net zero by 20.
Time has just gone 6:15. Our top story this evening. The Prime Minister is accused of running scared as he stays away from the Commons debate happening now about rules governing MPs. And still to come, the anti-vaxxers targeting hundreds of schools and calls for exclusion zones to keep them away.
Coming up in Sports Day in the next 15 minutes on the BBC News channel. 4 races to go, 19 points in it. How tough is it going to be for Lewis Hamilton to retain his Formula One driver's title?
The BBC has learnt that more than 250 people, mostly women, have applied to give evidence to a parliamentary inquiry into historical forced adoptions. The inquiry, which will examine why thousands of pregnant, unmarried women were pressured into giving up their babies in the post-war years, was prompted by a series of reports on BBC News. Our correspondent Duncan Kennedy has been to meet 2 of the women who hope to tell their stories to the inquiry, which is due to start later this year.
It haunts you. It's like a death, really.
This is Joan's story.
I wanted to keep him. It was cut and dried. There was no way they were going to let me keep him.
Joan became pregnant in 1961.
And that's me there.
But she wasn't married.
I was on holiday with you.
And says she was pressured into giving up her baby for adoption by everyone from social workers to matrons. She still remembers the humiliation as she handed over her newborn son.
He was taken into matron's office, and then they told me to go back into the nursery and take the bedding out of his cot and get it ready for the next child the next baby that was going to come along. And matron just said, "Oh, she's only crying because they're taking her baby away today." And I think that was really cruel, really, really cruel. And it's something I've never got over. Never will.
It's a wrench to part from your baby, but this mother has decided it would be better off with parents who can give it all.
It's now believed hundreds of thousands of unmarried women like Joan were forced to give up their babies in the 3 decades after the Second World War.
It was 1959 and I was 20 years old and I lived at home with Mum and Dad.
Margaret Souter says she was also coerced. and still remembers the day she tried to block the door to the social worker who'd come to take her baby for adoption.
I pushed the door so that she couldn't get in, and she said, you know, don't be stupid. This is what has to happen. You know, it's going to a proper family.
Are you saying that you physically tried to stop the door being opened by
Oh, yeah.
the social worker?
Yeah. Well, I pushed the door, and I said, oh, no. And she said, you know, you knew this had to happen. Come on, don't make so much fuss. It's all over now.
The BBC has now heard many similar stories, and more than 250 witnesses have contacted the Parliamentary Committee on Human Rights ahead of its inquiry into forced adoptions. The late MP, Sir David Amess, campaigned for the women, taking a letter to the Prime Minister calling for an official apology, something Joan and Margaret say is now needed.
I don't understand why they won't apologise. What harm is it going to do? But it would mean a lot to us. It would mean a tremendous lot to us.
You've never been able to have a reunion with your son in 60 years. Has there ever been a day where you haven't thought of your son?
No. There never will be.
I mean, now when I think about anybody taking a baby from me, I think I would kill them first. So why didn't I react more? I feel guilty that I didn't stop it happening. And I just feel like saying to people when I see them with babies, and I'm not, you know, do you realise how lucky you are? You know, that you've got that baby, and there's nobody going to come along and take it from you.
Margaret Suter talking about her experience of forced adoption, ending that report by Duncan Kennedy. A boy who was 14 when he killed his 12-year-old friend has been sentenced to jail. Marcel Gresh stabbed Robert Buncis over 70 times in Boston in Lincolnshire. Our correspondent Jessica Lane is in Boston. Jessica, this is a shocking and heartbreaking story.
Well, Robert Buncis's body was actually found in woodland just down the road from me here in the Fishtoft area of Boston in South Lincolnshire on the 12th of December last year. He'd been stabbed more than 70 times in what police described as a tragedy and an utterly senseless act. The prosecuting barrister, Mary Loram QC, reminded the court today that it's believed a significant degree of planning and premeditation was used to get Roberts to the scene here where he was attacked, chased and attacked again. Now, the defendant was 14 at the time of the murder, which meant that we weren't allowed to know his name. But today, the judge, Mr. Justice Jeremy Baker, said in sentencing him that he believed it was in the public interest to name Marcel Gresh, but partly because he will serve most of his sentence as an adult once he turns 18, and he was sentenced to a minimum of 17 years in custody before he can even apply for parole. Now, Robert Buncis grew up with his dad, Edgars Buncis. They moved to England from Latvia when Roberts was 7 years old, and a statement was read out in court for Mr. Buncis in which he said, "No father should have to bury his boy. I've lost my destination, my purpose. I miss him. I feel empty."
Jessica in Boston, thank you. The government's latest coronavirus figures for the UK show there were more than 32,000 new infections recorded in the latest 24-hour period, which means on average there were 34,255 new cases reported per day in the last week. 57 deaths were recorded. That's of people who died within 28 days of a positive COVID-19 test. On average in the past week, 170 related deaths were recorded every day. Numbers are often lower on a Monday. And just over 10.3 million people have received their booster jab. The BBC has been told of bullying and harassment by anti-vaccination campaigners outside hundreds of schools in the UK. The Shadow Education Minister Peter Carr says such incidents are ubiquitous in his constituency. He's accusing campaigners of intimidating both children and teachers. The Labour Party is calling for schools to be able to set up exclusion zones to tackle the problem. Our correspondent Lebo De Seco has more from East Sussex.
Stepping out of school and into the battle over COVID vaccinations. These pupils in Sussex met at home time by protesters and disinformation.
Don't take the vaccine! Don't take the vaccine!
For some parents, the tactics these campaigners use are a step too far.
Outside of children's school.
These idiots
outside of school.
Move them.
I don't agree with their opinion, but they're entitled to it. I don't have a problem with that. I don't have a problem with protesting. I have a problem with them doing it right outside the school where the kids are coming out and they might find that a bit, intimidating and all that. That's the only bit I have a problem with.
Deanna will be serving the notice.
Earlier, anti-vaccination campaigners entered the school itself, serving papers threatening legal action. The leader of this campaign group, who believes a range of extreme conspiracy theories, including that most people in power are paedophiles, says he won't stop until the COVID vaccination drive ends.
We have spoken to the head teacher of this school, who said he was served papers earlier on today, and he really did seem very shaken up.
This should be shaken up. It should be shaken up.
Teachers have told me, and there are parents who are saying this is frightening what you're doing.
Well, if handing an head teacher a letter is frightening, then it's frightening.
A lawyer told us that such letters and papers have absolutely no legal standing.
I believe it to be pseudo-legal nonsense. It's self-conflictual. It draws up points about law that are misplaced. It's intended to drive a threat towards teachers, head teachers and otherwise, and I think just has no foundation in law whatsoever.
Another school served.
Just over 400 school leaders told their professional association that they'd been targeted by anti-vaccination campaigners, mainly in the form of emails threatening legal action. Nearly 70 said that they'd had protesters immediately outside their premises. The issue here is not that some people have concerns about vaccinating children. It is the protests at and around schools undertaken by a hardened minority. These pupils in East London challenged campaigners outside their school.
We were asking him, okay, where did you get these sources from? He was talking about how it's poison. And we was like, okay, where did you get this from? He couldn't tell us a valid place, a valid point where he got it from.
He knew what he wanted to do. He chose a location and he tried to get as much of the leaflets as he had out, distribute it everywhere. It didn't really work.
Some MPs are now calling for schools to be able to use exclusion zones in order to bring an end to scenes like this at home time. Lebo De Seco, BBC News.
A major rescue mission is continuing in the Brecon Beacons to bring a man who's been trapped in a cave network for 2 days to the surface. He fell while exploring the extensive underground system near Penwith on Saturday and is said to be too badly injured to make his own way out. Our Wales correspondent Howell Griffith is there. Howell, this is a massive rescue operation.
Absolutely, Fiona. Despite the conditions, around 250 volunteers have turned out to help with this rescue mission. Underground, working step by step, inch by inch, to manoeuvre a stretcher through, well, an obstacle course of boulders and ledges and streams. Now, we understand that the casualty is a man in his 40s, an experienced caver who slipped and fell. He's had multiple injuries, but the good news is he's conscious and communicating, all adding to the optimism that this will ultimately end in a successful rescue. Hour after hour through bleak winter weather, volunteers are working in shifts to bring the injured caver back to the surface. He's being carried on a stretcher. Doctors are with him as they pass through some of the most challenging caves in Britain.
It's been protracted because we've had to take the long way out, if you like. We know how to handle these situations, controlling hypothermia, keeping people warm. One of the most ultimate things of what we do is casualty care, and the care of the casualty has been exemplary, amazing in fact.
This is where the caver went in on Saturday, the lowest of 3 entrances to a labyrinth of underground tunnels and caverns, so complex that only the most experienced cavers are allowed in. This is what draws enthusiasts here, a sculpted subterranean world in places almost 300 metres deep. It attracts cavers from across the UK. Teams have trained for rescues here. This video shows them practising with a stretcher in the same cave where they're working now.
You've got somebody that needs to be helped, and you know there's a lot of equipment that's had to go in and out of the cave, and hence the reason why we need lots of people. It's a long rescue.
How long is almost impossible to say, but the rescuers are resilient and optimistic that days of endeavour, years of training will finally bring their reward. Howell Griffith, BBC News at the Fun on the Cave.
Right, let's take a look at the weather now. Susan Powell is here. Hi, Susan.
Very good evening to you. It's a pretty quiet start to the week out there. And for the next few days, nothing's going to happen in a hurry. But the end of the week could have a little bit of a shock in store. But thank you to our weather watchers, as ever, for some beautiful images of how the evening has passed with some gorgeous sunsets. So we've seen some cloud trickling its way south across the UK. There's actually a band of rain set to push in to the northwest overnight. Wet for Scotland and for Northern Ireland for a time. By the end of the night, I think the rain will be pushing into northern England, perhaps just fringing in to the far north of Wales. Ahead of the rain, a southerly wind lifting the temperatures as we go through the night. It'll be a very mild start, particularly across England and Wales, temperatures of 11 and 12 degrees. And then a mild day to come on Tuesday with some bright or sunny spells. Can't promise you completely clear blue skies, but the front further north does hold some rain throughout the day for northern England and North Wales, but clearer skies behind for Scotland and Northern Ireland. Some sharper showers coming in though on quite a blustery wind. Quite mild even to the north of the weather front, but some colder air just getting into the far northwest of Scotland. And then, as I said, nothing moves anywhere in a hurry this week, so the front is still snaking away across England and Wales for Wednesday. A little further south, I think Wednesday, the greyest skies, the dampest weather, southern England, East Anglia. To the north, some bright or sunny spells, a few showers getting into the northwest of Scotland. It's looking actually pretty mild as well through the middle of the week, temperatures getting up into the mid-teens. It's the end of the week though, as promised, where things could start to kick off. There's quite a lot of uncertainty in this forecast at the moment, but it does look like as we look to Friday, we could see the remnants of a storm that we've been watching in the Atlantic heading our way. So Friday potentially could bring something very wet and windy, but as ever, we'll keep you up to date. Fiona.
Susan, thanks very much. And that's all from the BBC News at 6. And now it's time for the news where you are. Bye-bye.